Three, two, one. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting film journey here on Delusions of Grandeur. I am one of your hosts, but tonight we are continuing um, part of our celebration of being online for 5 years by having our good friend Dane uh, bring us some films here. So why don't you tell us exactly what you had us watch this week?
Well, continuing our journey through the Rocky films, these last few weeks we've done 1 through 4. So we're wrapping up the series. Well, at least as far as the Rocky series goes, we might make mention of Creed when we get to the next movie, Creed and Creed 2. But as far as the character of Rocky Balboa, we're covering Rocky 1 through 6. And now we have the rather dubious honor of arriving at Rocky 5, which was this entry in the series that kind of killed the series for 16 years. And this was the last one for that amount of time. And, you know, it was roundly disliked by critics and audiences. It didn't necessarily bomb, but it underperformed relative to the other ones, which obviously Rocky 4 was the biggest financial hit of the series, but this one definitely put the nail in the coffin for a good long time. And so the question that's here before us is it really as bad as its reputation? Because Stallone hates this one so much so that it made him bring the character of Rocky out of retirement for Rocky Balboa years later. But yeah, Rocky 5. This will be an interesting discussion because this is the one that I've seen the fewest amount of times. I had only seen it one other time when I was a kid prior to this viewing. So yeah, it definitely was not actively in my memory. I just remembered really not liking it. But is that fair? Well, we're gonna see. So, whose first time viewing was this? I think Tammy, would this be a first time watch for you?
Yes.
What'd you think?
Um, it was okay. It did not have the same, I don't know, how do you put it?
We'll
Same
we will
gusto, the same, the same feeling, the same whatever
mm-hmm.
as 1 through 4. It was all right. It just, and I guess I really didn't. I guess I didn't really like this storyline because I didn't like how, here Rocky did not want to train this kid
Yeah.
and he wouldn't leave him alone and wouldn't leave him alone. He finally gives in. And what does he do? He stabs him in the back. I kind of really just did not like that as, you know, I
Truthful though.
didn't.
Yeah, it is a little hard sometimes to kind of articulate exactly why, but this did leave a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, and I think I can articulate why it is if other people don't touch upon it, but we will get to it. But you thought it was okay though.
um, it was okay because Rocky was in it, basically. I mean, other than that, no. I mean, I would it be one that I want to go and watch again? Probably not. Would I want to watch the other four again? Sure.
Yeah, it definitely has less in the way of rewatchability, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, this is going to be quite a discussion. But who else had not seen it for the first time? Or sorry, who had seen it for the first time this time, rather?
I think just Jacob and waiting on him, right?
Uh-huh. Um, now, just to counterpoint, I guess we'll wait for him off as far as that goes. But as far as those of us who have seen it before now, I remember Kroll, you did like this one, correct?
Yeah, I mean, of the five movies, it is the weakest, but I mean, one has to be. That doesn't mean I didn't like it. I mean, I didn't love it, but I did like it. I don't know. I get Tammy's point, but it seems it's realistic. People do stab people in the back, especially when they get a little power and money thrown at them, you know. So, but people will betray people even for less. It happens. It sucks, but that's just human nature.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like the story, and it showed how much he didn't want to train him, and then he decides to, and then his son is like trying to get his attention, and he just completely ignores him. He just basically ignores his family to train the guy. He just goes all in, which he should have tried to balance it better, but Rocky's not exactly known for his smarts and stuff, so yeah. Like the character, love the character Rocky, but yeah. But he saw his mistake. He realized it, afterwards. I mean, his son had to give him a little bit of an attitude and blow him off and tell him, you didn't have time for me and I don't have time for you, and tell him off a little bit, which, I applaud because, he may be a teenager and you shouldn't tell your parents off, but, his dad was being a jerk and you need to let him know. So.
Well, I was going to say, pay special attention to the character of Rocky Jr. because as far as I'm concerned, this is his movie, and we'll get into that a little later on. But
I agree.
Now I see that Jake has joined us. Now this was a first time watch for you, is that right?
Yes, I'm on. Okay. Yes, this was the first time I saw Rocky V.
And
well, as we've as I've mentioned before, this was a franchise that I had some familiarity with, but not as much, I guess, as most people would expect, especially given all the movies that I do see. And it was, this was definitely one I had not seen, and I never really had much feeling like I need to, because it doesn't really have a stellar reputation even among Rocky fans. And since I wasn't really a Rocky fan, I was like, whatever. But I am glad I had this opportunity to look at it. And honestly, I didn't really think it was all that big of a step down. I got frustrated with Rocky. He was definitely a little too pig-headed in this one. And Tommy's just an ass. He really chose poorly for a potential protege. I mean, I guess in fairness, Tommy kind of chose him, but it was, I think the movie does get a little hard to watch at times. You get very, very, very frustrated with Rocky. You get a little frustrated with his son too, but mostly with that's more understandable, his thing. Overall, it wasn't bad. I actually probably, in terms of its quality as a film, I'd probably rank it pretty much on par with the last two, 3 and 4. I would say it's probably just as solid a film as they are. It's not as entertaining. They tried to go into some darker areas with it, which I give them props for, trying. So yeah, glad I finally saw it.
yeah. Well, again, it's good to get this kind of spectrum of opinion here because it is fair to point out for both you and Kroll and everybody. There were some critics who said they were in the minority, but there were some critics who were saying it was, at the time anyway, that they said it was the best of the sequels, which is interesting. And because then I heard other people say Rocky 2 is the best of the sequels. This was all
Rocky 3
before Rocky Balboa came out. I mean, so
I still do not change.
I know. I know you do.
I actually do put 5 above 6.
Interesting. Well,
I'm
we'll get
not
into
really
that.
above 6. I'm not really a fan of 6.
We'll get into that when we get to 6, because I had some mixed feelings on 6 as well, but I like the movie overall. But anyway, so we got to keep
It didn't
moving.
suck,
So,
but
Dave, I assume this is not a first time watch for you. Dave?
No, it is definitely not a first time, though I do believe that it might actually be a second time. Like I said, probably in previous discussions, 5 is like a blur, was like a blur to me. So once I saw it, yeah, I knew that I had seen it before, but it had been a long time. Honestly, I think a lot of times they've had the first 4 on whenever I've watched. Never had them like all in a row, at least whenever I've had them on. So, um, but yeah, this one kind of disappointed me at the time that I watched it, and it definitely doesn't entirely have the Rocky spirit to me. It felt like a cash in, sort of. But then again, you normally don't see the underhanded side of the business,
Mm-hmm.
where you can have a protege that will just get too big for his pants, you know. So
Don King seduced him.
Well, we'll get into that a little bit more because it is actually. Here's the thing. So, like Rocky 5, I think I don't know if nobody would say that it's the best of the series, and I think you know, I think a few of us would necessarily like vigorously defend it. But one,
Casting it wide enough, I'm sure you'll find someone that says it does.
oh, I'm
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah, I agree.
I'm sure you can. But here's where I'm getting at is that for its many failings as a movie, in the context of the series and the history of boxing and everything, it's actually a surprisingly significant entry in the series, and we'll get to that as we
I
go.
agree.
So again, it has a lot of problems, but it does have a lot of important intersections with how the rest of the series and how boxing itself went from this point on. Then Brandon, first
It
time watch
ended the
for you?
series, and I think it should have ended the series.
Well,
Well-
we'll get into that, but Brandon,
Not my first time watch. Actually, this one is probably the one that is the second least watched. 3 is probably the one that I've watched the least. My second,
Sacrilege.
it was my second watch for this one I was on for the third discussion. For this one, I've watched it 3 times, though. To tell you the truth, I remembered 3 better than I remembered this one. Because the first time I watched it was when it came out and I was 11 years old. And I didn't like it at all at that time. I thought it was horrid. And that remained my opinion when I watched it the second time, but I was probably reading something at the time because I'm guessing I just watched it so I could run the disc through, and I didn't even bother watching it at that time. So I'm not even sure I would consider that a watch. So this time I actually just sat down and watched it. I'm a good ways older than I was both times. Way older than I was the first time. Matter of fact, wow, it's been 30 years? More than 30 years since I watched it the first time. And I have to say, this one has gained a lot more respect from me than it had then. I was much better impressed. I could appreciate a lot of the stuff that they had gotten in the writing a lot more. Tommy Morrison was an excellent fighter.
A real boxer, by the way.
And
Yes, he was.
unfortunately, he had died not long ago, actually, like maybe 2013, something like that. I can't remember the
2013, he
year.
was 44.
Yeah, because
Complications
he'd
from
had AIDS, and
Yeah.
he was even known for boxing while he had it, which was one of those things.
Yeah. Well, he tried to run from it and hide it for a long, long time.
And so, that was one thing. As I've gotten older, I can understand and relate to what Rocky was doing and going through a lot more as far as feelings are concerned. I've done a lot of work with interns. I've taught people, and I understand where he's coming from in that. I also really, really like what it did touch on, because at the time it was going was around the time that Tyson had been signed on with Don King, and when people ask, like, boy, a poor judge of character, you don't have to be a terrible person necessarily. Like, Tyson wasn't necessarily a bad person overall.
Ask Holyfield that.
But he's very similar to the character of Tommy. He's got a lot of rage issues. He had a rough family. Really, I feel like Tommy was a stand-in for Tyson. And of course, our other guy was standing for Don King. And Tyson did the exact same thing. He was trained up by a person that was as close to him as family, took him in, did all this. And then Don King came in, offered him a lot of money, and he basically stabbed him in the back and left him for him. And of course, Don King later then took him for all he was worth, which, that, it happens. So I really, looking at this from the lens of knowing what I know now and better understanding, though I don't consider it the best of the Rocky movies by far, I do find it much better than I did. It's no longer my least favorite. But I watch the Rocky movies. I consider them different categories. I would consider this one in the same category as 1, 2, and 6. Just not as well executed as 1, 2, and 6.
You're talking about in terms of the seriousness of what it's dealing with.
Like 3 and 4 are their own thing.
They're the best.
So, but to me, this one is one I really like. I think I'll end up watching it again in the future. As I say, I have a lot more understanding of the characters, their actions, and what they were trying to do here. I don't think they executed as well as they could have, but I think that if they had executed it correctly, this could have easily been one of the best Rocky films.
Yeah, that is kind of the funny thing about this as I watched it back, which these are my impressions. So this was, I watched 1 through 4 back to back in an AMC marathon, and I loved them, absolutely loved them. Couldn't wait to see Rocky 5, and that's the one that they didn't air that day. But I had my parents get me the Rocky DVD set, the red one with the boxing gloves on it, from like the early 2000s, because I really wanted to own them because I just loved them so much, and I wanted to see Rocky 5, and they were like, I don't know, you're not gonna like it, because they didn't like it, and then I saw it on DVD, and they were right. I didn't like it. If anything, I actually hated it when I was a kid, absolutely hated it. I thought it was. I thought
more,
it spit.
more adult oriented.
Well, I thought it spit in the face of the series at that time. I did, and I really didn't like it at all. It really pissed me off for a long time, and even as I had heard other counter arguments, like I think it was James Rolfe had said that it was a sequel that wasn't good, but it didn't deserve its reputation, because they really did try with it, and so that got me thinking, well, was I really right in my feelings? And so this time I got to watch it, and also keep in mind when I watched it, Rocky Balboa and the Creed movies and everything that may yet be coming in the future, those things didn't exist. For quite a number of years, Rocky 5 was it. that was it. So through that lens, I was really pissed. But then now, knowing that we have Rocky Balboa, we have Creed 1, we have Creed 2, we've got other movies, I can look at it as more of like a middle chapter in the series. So you have to look at this movie through two different lenses. And so knowing that and knowing, um, kind of where it was at the time, where Stallone was at the time, and also, what they tried to do and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't get the venomous hate from me that it did. And if anything, I see it has a lot about it that's worth appreciating. I still don't really like it, but again, as I said, I think it's in the context of the whole series, some really, really important events happen in this movie. They're just not terribly pleasant events. But again, it's an important entry in the series, even though it isn't as well executed as it could have been. Um, Notable change this time around. So Stallone directed 2, 3, 4, and 6, but John G. Avildsen directed 1 and this one. They brought John G. Avildsen back, and I assume that it was partially to try to, because so this whole thing, the basic premise of this movie and the thought behind it going into it was basically, okay, so Rocky 4, there's no way that they could have possibly topped that in terms of ridiculousness unless they somehow got Rocky into space or something stupid like that. So basically, they went the total opposite route. They said, "Okay, well, so he's beaten the Super Russian. He's done this impossible thing. What if he got his wealth and his fame and everything? What if he just got it all taken away from him one day? What? How would he stand up? Could he go on?" Basically try to get the character back to his gritty roots. So let's get the original director from the first movie, let's get him back and try to get some semblance of realism back into this series. Um, worthy goal for sure. And again, dramatically lends a lot of possibilities to it. And again, they didn't slouch in the talent department because all the primary cast is here. The original director's back. Bill Conti's back on the score. He was not there for Rocky 4, although I absolutely loved what Vince DiCola did. But yeah, he's back. So this thing should all gel together. So where does it go wrong? Well, again, it comes down to execution because I think to a certain extent, part of what kind of clangs about this movie is again, it's kind of a victim of the previous film in the sense that last film did get so massive and so huge that you couldn't really continue that same kind of forward momentum. Uh, and so in this case, they just take a complete U-turn. So on the one hand, if you didn't really care for 3 and 4, then you'd be like, okay, finally, we're getting back to reality here. On the other hand, it's like, well, this so it's a question of get back to your roots versus backtracking or regressing. And for me as a kid, the whole thing felt like a massive regression. Like by the time we get to the end, I said to myself, what was any of this for? What was the point of any of this? And then, of course, now as an adult and knowing where it all goes from there, I'm like, oh, okay, I see it now. But that's really kind of what it comes down to. And it really does come down to execution, which is when it's not executed well, it feels like a regression or like a complete U-turn of the series. Um, so how but again, within that, there are some really important things that happen, not the least of which is in the beginning where, so Rocky just persevered through that fight with Ivan Drago, which in the tradition of Rocky up to this point, you could easily like supercut these movies together and just make one long movie. But here you see that this fight with Ivan Drago takes a physical toll on Rocky. I mean, yeah, he was the super Russian for a reason, and Rocky was just an ordinary guy, a well-trained guy, but basically, yeah, he doesn't come out of that fight unscathed, and you see his hands are shaking, and he's calling Adrian Mick, and like we've never seen Rocky this messed up after a fight, not once, and you know, so
Yeah.
that's a noticeable change. Plus,
Well, it was bound to happen. He
oh,
blocks
I
every.
know.
His fighting style is to block every punch with his head.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
you can't keep that up forever and ever, and especially not against essentially a super soldier, you know. So there's just no way that you can come out of that unscathed, and thankfully he doesn't. So that is a point for realism, and then as we later find out, it takes a big toll on him physically. I mean, you can already see the signs of it. And again, I didn't know this at the time. I can see a lot more of it nowadays. Because I originally thought that his kind of regressing into like his older speech patterns, like his rougher, more streetwise kind of speech patterns. I thought that that was just a function of getting John G. Avildsen back and wanting to get the character back to his roots. And yeah, that's in there. But then what I realized as an adult, I'm like, oh, okay, this is an early manifestation of the. Well, they say it's brain damage in this one, and then in Rocky Balboa, or when Stallone was making that, he said that after consulting with boxing professionals and doctors, he said that the level of injuries that he sustained would have given him some long-term concussions, but it wouldn't have caused like quite the same degree of brain damage that they make it seem like he would have here. So that could have been chalked down to like a second opinion or whatever, but or just advances in diagnoses and such and that sort of thing. But what I noticed was, again, his regression in his speech patterns and some of his just strange behavior. I was like, "Oh, okay, you could chalk that up to the, concussions he received," because I didn't know anything about that sort of thing at the time. Um, but that does happen. That's a proven thing, especially with athletes that have sustained a lot of them. Their behavior does change, and in the case of someone like, say, Chris Benoit, it can turn.
I was just thinking that, dude.
Yeah,
Just
if
thinking Chris
which
Benoit.
that's, sports entertainment, but still it's close enough. In the case of Chris Benoit, it's like, well, he turned homicidal. It was a, murder-suicide with his family, and thankfully, Rocky doesn't do anything nearly that bad. But nonetheless, you do see a behavioral regression with his character. And again, I have more understanding of it now than I did as a kid. I had no clue what any of that really was, but, and I've seen more evidence of it since then, but it just I guess what I'm getting at is that it does hurt. Well, especially like think back to when you're a kid and you're watching these movies and you see this
I
heroic
wasn't a kid when I
figure.
watched them, so.
Well, but like you're seeing this heroic figure and he's just fallen so far,
I get what you're
and
saying.
he's fallen so far and there's not really much of a payoff, at the end. That was what bothered me so much about it, and again, nowadays, knowing where it goes from there, I'm more okay with it, plus the fact that, well, not everybody is gonna bounce back quite to the same degree, and what they were going for was that it's kind of a moral victory. It's a, how far down can you get. Well, actually, Rocky sums it up really well in the next movie, which is it's not about how many times you can get how hard you can hit. It's about how many times you can get hit and keep moving forward. So they sum that up really well in the next movie, but here it's like, well, okay, they're trying to do that, but it's just bogged down by too much in the way of bad execution. But I mean, what causes Rocky to lose everything? Well, it's a little bit complicated, and you may miss it the first
Paulie.
time, but basically, Paulie gave he didn't know what was going to happen. That's the thing. Like, I actually don't. I'm not.
Yeah, I don't think
Like,
Paulie did
I
it on
blamed.
purpose,
I
but
I
yeah.
blamed Paulie for it when I was a kid, and I was pissed at him. But
Oh, Paulie is still to blame. I mean,
he,
he
he
didn't do
is.
it on purpose, but he
I
he
mean,
still he
Well, he is.
obviously
But
didn't
then
read.
here's what happened. Here's what happened.
He
So,
obviously didn't read what he was signing, and
well, here's
he
what
gave
here-
he gave
here's
his he
here's
gave
what
the
happened.
control of the money to Donald Trump essentially.
Well, here's what happened. Here's what happened. So Polly didn't.
no.
Here's the thing. So he didn't know what was going to happen after with the fight with Drago, which understandably so. I mean, he killed Apollo, so he was scared. Um, and so he gave power of attorney to their family accountant in the event of like his death or incapacitation or
No,
whatever.
it was an accident. He thought he was signing a tax extension.
Oh, that's right, the tax extension. Sorry, but
Tax extension. But like I said, so he is to blame because he always didn't read what the hell he was trying to sign.
Yeah. Well, the whole
I'm not
thing.
saying he did it on purpose. He didn't,
No.
obviously, but he failed to pay attention to what he was signing, and he screwed Rocky and his sister.
Yeah. Well,
he
what
really did.
happened was the accountant got power of attorney, and again, it's a little bit complicated, but basically took his earnings and was
Borrowed the
hoping to.
money and then wasn't able to
Yeah,
do
he
it
was
back
hoping to
because
turn it around into like real estate to try to
yep.
flip some money before
Yeah.
he'd even know it was gone. And of course, the deal
And
went
that's
through. And he apparently hadn't been paying his taxes for years because the accountant was mismanaging his money, and they were actually going to pursue criminal charges against the accountant, and they do, but that's a plot point that is not resolved, and I kind of wish
Yeah,
it
I mean,
was.
if the guy lost millions of Rocky's money and all these other people's money, obviously this guy doesn't have the money to pay it back. So even if he won his court case, you can't get blood out of stone. The dude don't have money; he doesn't have money to pay it back. So
Yeah.
it's not gonna, it's not gonna do you any much good to win the court case. It's still not gonna.
I was a little pissed because see, like as a kid, I didn't know any of that stuff. I was like, okay, Polly was being stupid, lost his money, whatever. But
Yeah, it wasn't. It
I
wasn't.
wasn't
It
happy
wasn't a
about it.
kid's
But now I
movie.
understand
Yeah.
I understand the details of it more now.
Well, he was basically betting it on a horse essentially. With the accountant doing this, like I say, I mean,
The horse
real estate moguls. I use Donald Trump because he was one of the more famous ones, and he won and lost a lot of money, but in the time, but Rocky didn't have that kind of money to shield him.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it
Well,
definitely
and
And
Trump
really-
was definitely riding high at this time, like
Yeah.
80s, 90s.
So, and he was probably one of the reasons why you would have made those investments, because you see the money that can be made, but also what people don't think about at the time is that interest rates jumped
Mm-hmm.
like sky high in the early 90s.
Yeah. Well, this was right before that big recession that cost George H.W. Bush
yeah.
a election bid.
And that was the problem, is they saw all this stuff happened, and then of course people vote with their pocketbooks, so of course that cost Bush Sr. the election.
Yeah.
But I remember that time when, I mean, shoot, I remember that rode high. Interest rates did not come back down to a suitable rate until 2008, and it caused because of a freaking market crash. And but yeah, I mean, I remember when 12% interest was a good deal
Mm-hmm.
in real estate.
Yeah. Well, it's bad news after bad news as far as the finances being basically gone, having to sell off his house, his stuff, and then on top of everything else, it's a
you can't fight.
form of brain damage, which again we've kind of established that upon further review that it wasn't as debilitating as they made it seem here, and that can happen where further research happens and doctors change their
So
opinions.
Rocky was right. He said Rocky said the doctors can be wrong. We should get
Yeah.
a second opinion. So he was right in the movie.
Yeah, well, he was ultimately, yes, but at that time nobody could have known that.
Right.
And but it was but it was enough to because Adrian throughout this whole series, and not without reason, has been fearful for his safety, and this is probably the time when she's the most fearful, and for good reason, because how are they to know? But he obviously was like, if I can book a few fights I could make back the money, and she's like, no, it's too dangerous, you could die. And so
She'd
it's
rather
not,
have him than the money.
yeah, exactly. And so that's when he starts to dig out some of his old clothes from the attic and finds her old pet shop glasses and starts moseying around the gym, Mighty Mix gym. And we get to see Burgess Meredith for the first time since 3, one of his last film roles, as I recall, not the very last, but one of the last. And you see him in a flashback, which a good way to bring him back, but at the same time, I was like, well, Mickey's being far more sentimental than he ever was in any of the movies outside of maybe 3 when he's like at death's door, which I thought was kind of amusing.
Well,
but
there's shown that there's another side to Mickey. He's not all just grr and hard, I mean,
mhm.
obviously he cared for Rocky like a son, So we just got to see the other side of him that we never saw.
Yeah, and I could, we saw evidence of that in 3, so it wasn't like
So-
totally out of character. But
What- You know what they needed was a scene that was deleted that they find later, where they're walking off the robot and the auction,
oh
and the
yeah,
robot screaming the line in Short Circuit, "No disassemble."
oh I know. And that's a noticeable omission from this and the future movies is the robot. I mean, I'm sure that realistically they probably would have had to have sold the robot just to make ends meet, get some money, and they probably could have made quite a lot to pay down
I
debts
think
or
they could have
whatever.
made a
But
lot of. I think they probably made more money than they let on. I mean, they went back to the neighborhood and kind of went back to a lousy neighborhood in a house and everything. But
well, so
I don't think they had to. I think they had a little bit more money than that. I mean, I think.
well,
I
here's
think
here's
even.
what happened is that Polly still had the house in the old neighborhood,
Oh, I know.
and Mighty Mix Jim had apparently been willed to Rocky Jr. And so that's how they were able to do that. So basically, they have a place to live, crappy as it is, and a possible source of income as kind of meager as it is, relatively speaking. But so an interesting little piece of trivia that I didn't know until I read up on it. So the necklace that Mickey gives Rocky, which is like a big deal in this movie,
Yeah,
and
it's
then
from the Rocky Marcianos.
yeah, and it kind of never is a big deal again. But apparently, I would have to check up on this looking back at Rocky 2, but apparently, well, so Mickey in this one he mentions who the other because he gave out 2 necklaces or whatever, and he was asking, who the other who's the other one with the necklace, and he said that Rocky Marciano gave it to some bum. Well, guess what? In Rocky 2, it's actually Apollo Creed who has the necklace. So that's kind of interesting. Kind of it ties them together. Kind of their destinies are kind of intertwined. So I thought,
I didn't notice that. That's
yeah,
pretty cool.
yeah, it is really cool. So again, as flawed as this movie is, it has little things like that I really like. But when we get back to the old Philadelphia neighborhood, we get introduced to a noticeable departure for the series in the music department, which we will cover in more detail, but it's worth mentioning now for the simple reason that the neighborhood has changed and so has the music to reflect it. Because this, and also the, time period's different, but we hear a lot of like hip hop and new jack swing on the soundtrack to try to make it more contemporary, and plus reflecting the fact that in these kinds of communities that would have been the music of the day. But right away, by hearing that, we know that things are not going to be quite the same, despite him getting back to his roots and everything. Um, but I just remembered kind of being slammed by that right away, and I'm like, gee, this is kind of a departure, but it makes sense because it's, they need to make it more contemporary and more reflective of, what people in those communities were listening
Yeah,
to.
let's just say the music sucked and didn't go on.
Oh, well, it's I will point out some hidden gems in this one, but in
Oh, they're
general,
hitting
it
pretty
is
well.
well in general it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb relative to the music of the rest of the series. But it is important in the context of of the whole series. But um, we mentioned a little bit Rocky's speech regressions, but we failed to mention the big character of the movie. Arguably, well, the main villain is not even Tommy Gunn, it's George Washington Duke, who we've already mentioned is a Don King stand-in.
Don King, yeah,
And
definitely.
he's probably, like, again, this movie has a ton of flaws, but he's not one of them. He's a pretty interesting character, very over the top, but in a way that is, you buy that this guy would behave that way, because there
Oh
are
yeah,
some
Yeah.
people who behave in kind of
he's
an over
Don
the top
King.
fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you've ever seen Don King back in those
Unfortunately.
days in the 90s, I mean, he was a very evil man. But I don't know, is he still alive? I don't know.
I don't
But
know either.
I mean, there are still those
There's-
murders that we're not quite certain whether he was involved or not. But he definitely he talked exactly like that. This dude got Don King down to a science.
Oh,
He was
totally.
amazing.
I totally bought that character.
And like
And
I
He
said,
was-
if he
was-
refuses, you got to insult him. You
I
got to
remember an old joke saying, "Is that your hair, or are you related to Don King?"
Oh, I know. You got to insult him. You got to dog him. You got to humiliate him. You got to do whatever you got to do to get him into that ring. But that's what you got to do. That's like his big speech.
I mean, and Tommy was definitely Tyson. There's no doubt in my mind that they were
Well, in
thinking
that role,
Tyson.
yeah.
I never knew that.
when they wrote that, because you think of, I mean, you got to look at the thing. I mean, they had a similar family background, which it really
Nothing about Tyson.
could have worked more on the family background. They could have, if they fleshed out his character. That's one of the few things. I mean, again, the flaws of the movie. If they fleshed him out more, I think it would have been more interesting. But much like him, he had a lot of anger. He had a lot of, I mean, as we know, what you pointed out, Kroll, there's a lot of anger that Tyson had. And like Tyson, Tommy was very, Tommy has a lot of energy. I think that if he and Rocky had fought, it would have been the same thing with a lot of them. He would have been very strong in the first rounds, but if he went the distance, he'd have fallen like a stack of bricks.
Yeah.
Like they all do.
Well, that's a good time to talk about Tommy Gunn, because I agree with you. I think on paper, I think Tommy Gunn has a lot going for him as a character because of his history. Like, we just get like two scenes where we actually learn about him in terms of his spoken backstory and his behavior. Because his spoken backstory, because he comes across as, like, at first, as a very, like, polite, well-spoken guy who idolizes Rocky, who, really wants to be like him, be trained by him. He seems to be doing all the right things. Came from an abusive household, imagines his father in the ring every time he fights. And then, of course, when we see him sparring, he's going way too far, being way too brutal, and doesn't know when to stop. And it's like,
Well, now
okay,
we know why.
well,
Well, more to the
that's an
point, he doesn't know
interesting.
to listen.
Well, and that's an interesting character right there. It's just that we don't really get much more than that. But, from that point on, he's just kind of an asshole the whole movie, and and not even like an interesting asshole like Clubber Lang. He's just kind of just a punk and a white trash ostensibly. And there's really not much more to him, and it's sad because he had potential. Go ahead.
He does show that he is kind of a poster child, if you will, for the idea of selective hearing, because he does not listen very well at all to most things that people tell him, including his supposed coach, Rocky. But he fully absorbs the things he's interested in, to the point where he's pretty much treated by everyone as a Rocky clone because he's so good at Rocky's fighting style. So he fully absorbed the stylistic training, the methods, I guess you could say, of the actual fighting, but he didn't really have much interest in anything else, and so he pretty much didn't absorb anything else. And it's one of the things that, like that first sparring match, yes, he's way too aggressive, and he also does not listen when Rocky tells him, "Hey, man, whoa, you're being a little aggressive here," and and so it's like right away you're like, yeah, this is probably not going to end well.
Well, and he's also somebody who, he like you said, he does take from Rocky what he can, but then, as Adrian later says, that he doesn't have Rocky's heart, because Rocky always fought with his heart, which is absolutely true. And that's what's interesting about the conflict between Rocky and George Washington Duke, is that Duke is just the consummate promoter. Money, nothing else matters but the good publicity, the fight, the etc. And it is important to
Well,
note that this was
Brand-
around the time. This was around the rise of Tyson, and also the fact that fights were fixed or were corrupt or whatever. This kind of thing was more in the public consciousness.
and also Brandon brought up the whole socio-political aspect of the time. And again, this was 1990. This was still just 3 years after Wall Street, and the famed "Greed is Good"
Oliver
speech from
Stone's
Wall
Wall Street.
Street. And you get the feeling that this dude, this promoter, he probably had Gordon Gekko on repeat on his
Definitely cut from a similar cloth, that's for
yes.
sure. But I do find it kind of refreshing with Tommy, though, that we finally get someone who's very clearly like a Midwesterner in this thing, just for the sake of variety and the sake of like having a different flavor. Because like Brocky obviously is from Philadelphia, and then Paula's from LA, so it's nice to have a little variety on that level. And obviously, of course, Ivan Drago is from Russia, so we're getting slightly some more mix up in terms of where everybody's from. Go ahead.
Did you notice that the fighter that he was trying to promote Rocky to fight in the early time was doing his best Mike Tyson impression?
I didn't, but
It was funny.
yeah. I mean, again, everybody's minds. Tyson was on everybody's minds at this time because he was kind of one of the last great hurrahs, like societal hurrahs, as far as the sport of boxing in the popular consciousness is concerned. But again, that came with a lot of drawbacks because Mike Tyson was a little bit closer to a Clubber Lang in terms of not having the niceties and just being a brute, in and out of the ring. But one of the things I do like about the fact that it doesn't work out with Tommy Gunn, and if it were up to me, this could have easily been the whole movie, like the whole focus of it. Because the whole focus of the movie as it's written is, what does a man do when everything's taken away? How does he still have dignity? That's what it's about. But like, as far as I'm concerned, like you could have easily made this movie kind of an example of a destructive master-student relationship. And those elements are definitely here because you've got someone who's down on his luck, who's never trained anybody before, isn't really used to being in positions of leadership, who gets this guy following him around, who's idolizing him, and Rocky does like to be idolized, as who wouldn't? And he's like the one guy in his corner who is doing that at this point. And so they both see, all the ingredients are there to kind of ride each other to glory. But guess what? He's got this guy who's got this hidden dark side, and Rocky doesn't have all of his wits about him. And they could either go their separate ways, which is what they end up doing, or they could mutually destroy each other. But obviously here they try to have them go their separate ways through, a scam, a scheme, which is what Rocky fell victim to from his accountant.
After
But so
son of a bitch.
it's keeping up with the theme. It's one of those things that I think you could have explored it a little bit more, and less of like, I guess, maybe a swindling, and more of like a just two people who do need each other, but they're opposing styles, because Tommy fights with anger and Rocky always fought with heart. That could have been the force that drove them apart. Still there, but it's just not executed as well as it could have been. And we keep saying that, but I think here's why I think that predominantly, and people can jump in to kind of agree or disagree with that. To me, the thing that kills the movie, or its potential rather, is actually Stallone's acting, which is really weird because again, this guy knows the character better than anybody. But like, and again, I'm willing to give a certain degree of this being due to the brain damage or to the concussions or whatever. But like his acting is just not very good in this. Like if you watch his performance, like he barely stands still. He's like really like moving around constantly and kind
I
of
think he played the character correctly, and from what he thought he had brain damage. I mean, they wrote it like he had brain damage.
yeah.
And
And
he acted
if,
like
any,
he had
if
brain damage.
anything, if anything, I do again, looking at it through modern eyes and through adult eyes. If anything, I do give them some credit for playing it the way that they did, because apparently Stallone originally wanted to show him much more like really obviously debilitated, like
Yeah.
to the point where it would be like extremely sad, but then he realized it would be a little too sad.
Right.
I actually see that's one of the things I do differ with is I do think that Rocky did an excellent job portraying.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sylvester Stallone did an
Okay.
excellent job portraying what he had to do. You had to go a little bit over the top to portray what was going on, and I know like when they had that initial scene, I can't remember whether it was that one that you had the issue with originally, Dane, was his scene there. The feeling was a little bit over the top after the fight. But to
Well,
me,
it was that, but then the other thing that again that kind of bothered me was, and again, knowing what I know now about concussions, it probably shouldn't bother me as much as it did, but like Rocky, like when he's first coming home, like he has never been like that overtly like sexual in any kind of way, but he is kind of that way with Adrian, and then he comments on the drawing that Rocky Jr.
yeah.
was making, and I was like, this just feels wrong. But then again,
Well,
I know now that
Hey,
with
but
concussions that can happen.
you gotta love that line though. I wouldn't show
that's
this to your
hilarious.
mother. She don't know French too good.
Yeah, that part is
It
kind of
is.
funny. But
It is.
well,
Well,
at least
I liked what she said when he said, "I'll treat you like a meter," and she's like, "I hope you have a quarter" or something like that. And it was just like it was really
yeah.
great play on what he said.
I mean, I guess we're due for like, one or two, because we haven't really had any, in the movies before this or
Definitely needed some
even
comedy in the
after.
movie too, because
I mean,
There
even
is, but
Paulie
it
wasn't all
doesn't.
that funny.
There is comedy in this, but generally it falls really flat,
Yeah.
which is sad, because again, Stallone as a writer knows how to blend tones, and like even for as dark and kind of rough as like the first Rocky could get with the family dynamics and stuff with Polly, like he knew how to always throws the turkey out the window and then he keeps the leg. You hungry, Rock? Like that was funny, and he was able to like balance those things really well. Here the humor just doesn't work, and partially it's because, well, the jokes are kind of intentionally bad, but like in combination with everything else, it's like, man, this is just miserable, but again, I get it now in a way that I didn't fully get it at the time, and particularly with just the fact that people's behavior does change when they've taken that many blows to the head.
As far as like his scene where he's sitting there, he's talking about seeing Mickey and the shaking and all that. I mean,
That was great. That
I've
was very
been,
effective.
I've been, I work at the ER weekly practically, so I've seen people exactly like that. To me, I felt like the acting was spot on in that point. I really thought, and to me, yeah, what he was given was not exactly the best thing in the world, but I do think that he did a decent job with it because even down to how he was speaking, things were very different for him, but only in a subtle way. Just like there was a little bit of him, and he was not only dealing with that, but he was having to come to terms with finding his identity again. And that's a horrible thing when the only thing, and that was established in the second film, when he had his ability to fight taken from him, he discovered that was the only thing he had. And we're right back to number 2 again. But this time, he doesn't have a choice. He's not able to get back into the ring. And I really did like that aspect. It is sad that this movie tried so hard to be Rocky 1 that it blew past it and went below.
Like, yeah, that's I guess what kind of hurt about it as a kid. It was like, and I get it. They are trying to get him back to his roots. They're even getting the original director to try to get some of that edge back. But it feels like we're going backwards even from where we started, and that was part of the the part that was the
Actually,
part that hurt so much. But then again, it's like I can see how let's say that, well, obviously, so Tommy, he trains him, and Tommy does do well, getting all the way up to just being underneath champion, by the time that they part ways. But that plus the gym, probably could have given Rocky a little bit more of a way to get back on his feet again, but
Well,
you know,
what I was gonna say,
go ahead.
as far as concussions go, I had a slight concussion at one time. Fell on the ice really bad, and I know how I felt. So I don't know if anybody else has had one, but I can kind of,
I did.
see where you're going from with this and how he was acting and everything. Because I know how I felt at the time, and I know how my head felt and everything. Everything just was weird. It just, nothing seemed right. And it was only
Yeah,
a slight concussion, because I fell and I hit the back of my head really hard on the ice. And, David took me to the hospital, and they said I had a slight concussion, and just the way I was feeling, I actually did feel like I was talking slower, and I felt like I was just
yeah.
out of it.
Well, and I know that sort of thing happens, so I give them more grace now than I did at the time. Um, and it feels less, obviously manipulative, which is how I felt at the time. I'm having to look at this thing through two lenses because my childhood self was really pissed, and then nowadays I'm like, it's a lot truer to life than I gave it credit for. But I
That's
guess what hurts the most about this one, even through adult eyes, is Rocky was a hero for so many people and still is, very inspirational figure. And but heroes can fall, or they can fall on hard times, or they can do whatever. And it's sad seeing them in those kinds of stages of their lives, which is, that's all fine and good. And Rocky's been through hard times before and would continue to, but and that was the whole point of the series. What really got me was that you saw him just acting like a jackass the whole movie pretty much, because not just with the fact that he's kind of mentally regressing, but it's much more so that in doing so he's neglecting his family. He's trying to chase the old glory through Tommy Gunn, trying to get some kind of semblance of his old dignity back, which again, not necessarily hard to understand, but he's doing it at the expense of his wife and his child, like the whole movie pretty much, which again, not unheard of with people that have had those kinds of head injuries. But it's just like, man, you get so pissed at seeing this otherwise very honorable person, someone that you look up to, and you see him, I think I even in the chat I compared this movie a little bit to the Osbournes, in the sense that you see the family dysfunction, you see a person that you might admire on some level just doing stupid thing after stupid thing after stupid thing, and you're just like, get a clue already, um that's kind of how it came across to me. But but again, I see it more from his point of view. Like, he is trying to hold on to some semblance of who he was, and to try to almost live through Tommy. And he obviously just bet on the wrong horse on that front. And
Yep,
neglecting
and then
his
his
son.
son got pushed to the background, his whole relationship with
Exactly.
his son, too.
Well, and that is a good time to talk about Rocky Jr., who really, so he first technically appeared in Rocky 2, having been born. He's just been a little kid in 2, 3, and 4. Now is the first time where he's actually like a real character for once.
yep.
In this movie,
Well,
played by
plus, isn't he played by
Sage.
Stallone's
Yes,
actual son?
yeah, Sage
He is.
Stallone, who is tragically no longer with us. And
What happened?
right.
he died. I can't remember why.
Oh shit.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
no
I
longer with
vaguely.
us.
Now, there is that interesting thing though that Rocky goes.
Coronary artery disease caused by atherosclerosis. That was.
He was only 36.
I know.
Ouch.
Oh wow.
Very sad.
But it is interesting that Rocky goes off to Russia and comes back, and his son is 5 years older.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that. That's another like kind of shitty thing about this movie.
They actually pushed it forward 5 years later. They just, I guess they did like a time jump without really letting anyone know they did a time jump, or you know, like you don't even realize it's a time jump until
what they didn't tell anyone. What they didn't tell anyone was that returning from Russia, they were lost in the time stream, and
something like that. In Soviet Russia, space-time bends you.
Indeed, yes.
The whole time he was back in Philly. He was there for 5 years. It just, they didn't do anything to show that's what happened. So,
well, I was gonna say, like, I forgave the because another alleged continuity error that was mentioned was, you remember last Christmas, right? We didn't, do that for last Christmas. And someone in IMDb pointed out that they didn't celebrate Christmas that way, because they were mentioning he was in Russia and that kind of stuff. But I'm willing to grant them that some years have probably passed between them selling off all the stuff and moving back to the neighborhood. That can take some time.
Yeah, it was 5 years. I mean, but
yeah, and I'm willing to grant them that, and they just wanted to have the same actor at all stages. But like, it is very distracting seeing Sage Sage Stallone as Rocky Jr. being so much older when he comes from Russia. That always kind of struck me as weird. But I mentioned Rocky Jr. as a character for a very specific reason besides just who played him in the movie. But like, I think this is kind of his movie in the sense that he's the real kind of, I hate to say victim, but like he's the one who suffers probably the most in this thing and has every reason to feel the way he does in this movie.
Totally. I totally, like I said, I think he acted out exactly how he should have acted out towards his father. I mean, his father was being completely ignored, was being a complete jerk to him. And, he being a teenager, he fought back the only way he knew. I mean, he didn't physically fight back, but, he fought back and he hurt his father the way he could. But the way he got hurt, just so his father would realize what he did to him. And his father does.
And my favorite part of it is, again, they don't sugarcoat how tough it is for him. And he was he was a privileged rich kid who has to go to the slums when his father does something stupid. He has to survive in this dog eat dog world. He makes some kind of dubious friends. He gets an earring at one point. His dubious friends were people who used to beat him up, and he learns that violence is the answer and that kind of stuff. And his father's neglecting him, and his mother, is trying to do her best, but can't really juggle anything as effectively as she'd like to, and he resents his father for it. And my favorite part of the whole thing is that kind of resentment, on some kind of deep level, it's not as overt as it is in this movie, but it stays throughout the rest of the series. Like Rocky 6, his relationship with his father is estranged, and that continues even all the way through the Creed movies. Things are not rosy perfect between them ever again. And so, again, that's what I was saying. Like, this is not the best entry, but it has a lot of repercussions throughout the rest of the series. Like, what Rocky does in this movie has lasting consequences on his relationship with his family. His son doesn't really want to come around much anymore. He probably kind of looks down on his father. And as we later learn in Rocky Balboa, has completely foregone any kind of fighting at all. He uses his brain. He takes after his mother much more, and perhaps rightfully so.
I think he totally looks down on him, especially when they I mean, not to talk too much about that movie yet, but when he tells him outside the restaurant, he doesn't want him to fight because he's outshadowing him and stuff. He's just totally being a selfish dick. just like he was being a selfish dick when his father asked him to come to the restaurant. I knew he wasn't going to show. At least he did call.
Yeah.
But still.
Well, but again, this movie establishes, I think, actually pretty effectively why Rocky Jr. feels the way he does. So if anything, it's a resounding success on that level, especially relative to future events.
What is the way they ended it seemed like Rocky was making up for his past mistake and was trying to,
Yeah.
be there more for his son, and that's what I expected. So when I saw it in Rocky Balboa, I'm like, well, what the hell? Why are they estranged again? It just, I don't know, it didn't really make sense from the way Rocky 5 ended.
Well, I
which
can
is just
actually
one of the issues I have with that movie.
Well, I'll tell you what though, that's actually one of the things I like about 6 the most, because it's extremely true to life that yes, things can be okay in the moment and the parent can resolve to do better, and indeed maybe they are doing better for a while, but those scars are still there. And sometimes
I
the
get
old
that, but
the
still.
old the old patterns come back, and
Not to mention the one very valid thing that really had almost nothing to do with this movie, but definitely they did. And again, when we get to Balboa, we'll talk about it. But the idea of when someone has an outsized reputation like that, you're going to have to deal with it one way or another. I mean, so there was like that. The whole idea that he could not outrun his father's shadow, that makes perfect sense regardless of what happened in this film. So
well, and the
but,
whole big
yeah.
in Rocky Shadow thing, that's obviously Tommy's big dilemma, them calling him basically his surrogate or his puppet or
His
his
robot.
What do they call him? They call
his clone.
yeah.
They call his clone. Yeah, they call him everything under the.
I know. I was trying to remember some of them because a couple of them were actually vaguely creative, and some of
It
them
was,
weren't,
but you can see from, you can definitely see Tommy's point of view, how that would grate on you. I mean, not saying he was. I don't think Tommy's as bad of a guy as others do. I mean, I don't think he was being that much of an asshole until Don King got involved or whatever the hell his name is. But he was getting nitpicked, and that was pissing, and it would piss anybody off. To call the clone and all this other stuff that the
Well,
people.
that's the media for you.
Oh, I know,
The
I get
media.
that, but obviously he's from he's like we already said, he's from the Midwest. He's from this probably smaller town area where you don't have to deal with people being dickheads. He's not from Philly or Los Angeles where it used to be in growing up on the streets where people are mean all the time. They're not as mean.
people are
I don't
dicks
think
everywhere you
Tommy's
go.
resentment.
Yeah,
was
but it's less in
escalated.
the Midwest than it is in other areas from what I've experienced and heard from people. I mean, we don't actually know exactly how he grew up, but except for his abusive father. But I'm just saying, in general, they're way meaner in the rural cities in New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, stuff like that. So, he's just probably not used to dealing with it. And then he's dealing with fame and being called that and everything, and then he gets the money thrown at him, and I think that's why he turned towards the dark side, I guess you wanted to say.
Well, I think it's that
I
plus
don't think
the whole abuse thing.
He wanted to get out of Rocky's shadow, and he wanted to, and make money too. So I mean, it wasn't entirely, I think, a bad guy move. It just,
Yeah,
it's
I
the way
didn't I didn't
did
like
it.
venomously hate him, but at the same time, it's like, he's just not that interesting of a character outside of like the 2 scenes where we really kind of get to know him. Tammy's trying to say something.
I don't think the I don't think the resentment that Tommy felt would have escalated as much as it did if it wasn't for the media. The media
Well, I agree.
really was, they were the ones that pushed this so bad on him,
Yeah.
and they were a big part of how things got out of hand.
Well, and George Washington Duke didn't help matters any because
Oh
he's
no.
definitely a manipulator of
Yeah.
not just people but also the media itself. But
Yeah, he was shoving it into the guy's face, and he even perfectly pointed out that Balboa is better and all this other, and he's like, oh, you really think Balboa is better? And he's just like, he just pushes buttons like all the right ways, and he knows you're right. He's a master manipulator. He manipulated the media even worse. He manipulated him through the media and through his words, and he totally pulled him away from Rocky, pulled and threw and gave him the car and then the other stuff. So he's saying Rocky's bad, I'm great, Rocky's bad,
yeah,
just whispering that, and not those exact words, but in all his actions and what he says, that's exactly what he's doing, planting the seed that Rocky's bad for him, and he's good for him, and he'll get all the great things work going with him, the girl, obviously the girl was a fucking plant, right from the beginning when you introduced her. I'm like, oh,
well, I think it's one thing I want to make sure doesn't get lost is this movie doesn't do the whole training montage thing to nearly the same degree of gusto as 4 does, which again, how could it? I mean, that was like training montage the movie, but
yeah, that was great.
I would say it has possibly the most story-wise some of the most impactful training montages in terms of or just passage of time montages with some of his fights and all that Tommy showing him rise up the ranks. That's probably some of the most effective montages that have ever been done in the series, alongside actually 3 showing Clubber Lang's rise to prominence. It takes some similar notes there from that playbook, but again, not Stallone doing it. It's John G. Avildsen doing it, so it's a little bit more impactful story wise. It's less stylistic. It has a little bit more meat to it in terms of the story. So points given there. But that's also where you see that contrast of like, well, they're repeating some of the same moments from like Rocky 1 in terms of where they're shooting. Like they're shooting in the old chapel, they're doing the steps, they're doing the market, all that stuff. But then you also see Rocky Jr. trying to train to, well, defend himself at school, but also to win his father's respect. And that isn't even enough. And so, it's like after that point, it's like, where do you go? And they're lucky that he doesn't like get into drugs or join a gang or something, because that's usually the next step.
Well,
And
Yeah.
Rocky doesn't even seem to realize that his son is there training.
I know
He's
it's
like
just,
he's oblivious because he's just focused on Tommy, and his son's like right there, and he
oh,
doesn't
I
even
know.
look at him.
Well, and that's what hurt me so much about this movie when I was a kid. I was like, it's like 0 to 0 pretty much in terms of his behavior.
Well, and got to keep in mind if you're looking at this, and like I say, I've only gotten a little bit of this feeling when I've been teaching students. I mean, right now I'm a student coordinator at one of the places I work at, so I work with a lot of them, and a lot of it is seeing their accomplishments as your own. I mean, when I get somebody ready to see somebody and then they give that person a compliment, they're giving me a compliment because I am the one that trained them. And it's even bigger for Rocky because he can't fight anymore, but he's got somebody who can. He's got a surrogate that is there to be in the ring for him. And though Rocky isn't winning the fights, and he tries to explain it himself, which is kind of cool, but even though Rocky isn't winning the fights, he is, because it's his training that's winning the fights. So he's still able to fight and still able to win without basically risking certain death as he would if he stepped in the ring. And this is it's very realistic. It's not pretty, but it is realistic and is a part of the human condition.
Oh yeah. Well, and I guess it's just one of the lessons I guess to take from this movie is just that heroes are people too, and that they're capable of foibles, and failings, because and Rocky was never a perfect character. Like we saw in 2 that he was kind of a wastrel with his newfound wealth, which again was not exactly uncommon with like people that are poor who like win the lottery or something. They behave in similar ways. It's just again, it's just always sad because he usually tried to maintain his dignity even when he was in a low place. Like in 1, that's what 1 is all about. Rocky 1 is that's what it's all about someone who was a very, very good person who just didn't look like one. And then you see him do so many stupid things, and it's just frustrating. But but what I like about it is that yeah, he does try to do better by his son once he doesn't have Tommy to fall back on, and I like that Rocky Jr. does kind of lay into him in a lot of key instances to tell him, yeah, you've been an asshole this whole time. And you get the sense that Rocky is going to try to do better, but again, I like that if anything, I like that it feels a little incomplete or a little unsatisfying, just because that does lend itself to a lot of true to life behaviors from Rocky Jr. in the rest of the series. That is very true to the way that children of parents, and especially famous parents like that, how they act. They want to be their own people, and the scars don't fully heal of parental and child strife. So I think that is handled actually pretty well. If anything, I feel like that could have been a little bit more front and center. Um, but again, this movie is trying to juggle a lot of things, and it doesn't always juggle them most effectively, because I think it kind of puts its energies towards some things that are, perhaps inappropriate, or they puts too much towards one thing and not enough towards something else. But, you know, they did the thing I come back to with this movie that I didn't really see at first is you can tell they did try, you can see the effort, you can see the story they're trying to tell, and that they are really trying to tell it well. It just the pieces didn't come together fully.
Well,
Um, Apparently, part of that is because of 2 things. One is that in the original draft of the script, Rocky was supposed to die. Um, and I've heard conflicting things. I've heard that the studio said no, and then I've heard that after having talked to the studio, that both Stallone and Avildsen felt like it went against the spirit of the series. So it's probably that. And I am glad that Rocky doesn't die, because I agree. I think that would have kind of been the ultimate. You've had this character just fall and fall and fall and lose this and lose that, and then he's going to lose his life, and then okay, that's it. Bye. I would have been pissed about that as well. But apparently, I guess they might have shot that ending, but we haven't gotten to see it. Or there might have been hints that they were trying to shoot it, because I've seen some stills that have surfaced since then. So that's point one. Point two is actually that according to James Rolfe, the angry video game nerd, apparently there is a work print of Rocky 5 that has circulated in bootlegs that is apparently much better than the theatrical cut, that some really good stuff got left on the cutting room floor. And he was saying that after Rocky 4 having gotten its own director's cut, that it would be great if Stallone could go back into the editing room and do another cut of Rocky 5, not a director's cut because he didn't direct it, but some other alternate cut to maybe show us some of those things, and maybe show a better side of the movie. And part of why he probably won't is because, well, Stallone actually gave this movie a 0 out of 10. He hates it so much, but also he doesn't really want to revisit it, I'm sure, because of Sage. He doesn't want to have to think about that. And I can understand that. I mean, that would probably be difficult to take. Yeah, you were wanting to say something.
I want to say that one thing that did come together for me on this movie really well was the fight at the end. Now I felt like it ended abruptly, but
that's where I'm getting to next.
Yeah, I was going to say that fight at the end, I definitely didn't want to leave that out, because that was probably one of the best fights of a lot of the series. It was rough. It was nasty, but it was right there. It was in your face. It was real.
It was real.
Yeah. Well, so that's where I was going next, which is that again, for as many faults as this movie has, for as many just moments where we have to watch Rocky act like a jackass over and over and over again, and as much focus as does get put on some things that maybe shouldn't, and not enough focus on other things, even people that hate the movie pretty universally, and myself included, even when I was a kid, we all kind of universally do really like the street fight at the end, and rightfully so, because that was something that had never happened before in the series and hasn't really happened since, even in the Creed movies, really. So it is pretty unique, and it is a well choreographed fight. Actually, Kroll will appreciate this. It was choreographed by Terry Funk, the wrestler, if you can believe it. Yeah, which is pretty cool. And it is down and dirty. It's nasty. So as far as like, and I remember Mo in the chat was saying that it reminded him of video games of the time, like Streets of Rage, which is true. That was the time period for it. And the thing is that I think the thing that kind of holds it back, though, at least story wise, is that there's not really too much at stake outside of that, like I mentioned earlier, that moral victory of just holding your head high and not allowing someone to beat you down, literally or metaphorically, not allowing life to beat you down. That's what they were trying to go for, but I mean, it also doesn't really change much either, because he's still broke. Tommy's still the champ.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was covered on the news and everything, but it's like
He ain't getting
not a whole lot has really changed. So as cool of a climax as it is in that way, story-wise it changes very little. Other than maybe you get to see him beat the crap out of not just Tommy, but you see him sock, George Washington Duke, and like, sue me for what? Because he doesn't have anything that's, he could sue him, but it's like he doesn't have any money anymore. So
Die Hard moment.
a little bit, yeah. But it's
I got a kick out of that. If you hit me, I'll sue you. You hit me, I'll sue you. And then, and
sue me
like you
for
said,
what?
when he finally does it, he's like, sue me for what?
Yeah, I know.
He doesn't have anything. That's the whole point. He lost everything. Has to live back there. I mean, he might have had a few dollars in the bank, but nothing of anything substantial. So yeah, sue him for what? What does he have? He has shit.
It's
Well,
just perfect though, because this guy keeps saying it.
Yeah.
He finally has enough and just pops someone.
I think that is actually my favorite scene in the whole movie. I mean, like I said, I like the movie and there was some good scenes, but that guy really, really deserved to get hit, and I wish he had knocked him out. But hitting him was definitely the best thing.
And the fight with Tommy, I love the brutality of it, because that's what street fights are, brutal.
Oh yeah, I love
Rocky
I love the drop toe hold he did on Tommy when Tommy came running at him, and he just like steps aside, drop toe hold, boom. I mean that's a common phrase in wrestling if you don't know.
Yeah.
But
Rocky was like, no, this ain't the ring. I can do what I want.
Yeah, this ain't a boxing ring anymore. This isn't pow pow pow. I'm gonna use everything I have. I mean, the guy was. I mean, at first when they thought the fight was like over, and Tommy just sucker punched him, literally, and just kept going and going. He wouldn't let it lie. Which it's funny though. At the end, you see the police like kicking Tommy away, like they're arresting him. Like they're not arresting Rocky, because I guess I don't know. They were both fighting, so technically they both probably should have been arrested, but because Rocky's like a fucking hero to them.
Tommy was the aggressor, right?
He was,
because
still,
Tommy started by basically attacking somebody else.
Yeah, he was attacking people in the crowd.
Yeah. So
no. Actually, he punched Paulie first. I mean, Paulie was mouthing off to him, like Paulie does.
But he didn't deserve that right in the face.
Paulie should know that a guy like that is not gonna sit back and not do anything. So yeah, he got what you expect him to get, the punch. He expected it, but that pissed off Rocky. And Rocky's like, "Why don't you try hitting me?" And that was the whole thing.
Yeah, which again, good climax overall, and actually two two lines that are pretty badass from Rocky, who again, this is not his finest hour by any means, but he gets two badass lines, which is, well, my ring's outside. It's like that was badass. And then, come on, Tommy, come on, knock me out. It's like that was pretty good too. And I guess, sue me for what? That's not bad either. But yeah, like especially like my ring's outside, like that was pretty badass, I have to say. So this movie does have its moments, admittedly. Um, but I am very surprised looking at the series as a whole. I'm surprised that it took up to Rocky 5 to actually get a street fight, because I think it was Brandon, you had mentioned that at some point that they had mentioned that he had had some street fights growing up.
Yeah, in the first one, he had started out as a fighter. That's how he got recruited as a loan shark, because he was doing street fights as a kid.
Yeah.
And then he got recruited into the kind of underground fights in the boxing ring, and then that he got licensed as a fighter, and then that from there he was available for Apollo Creed to make
Yeah.
destiny happen.
Well, it's just, but I guess my question is like, it's hard to believe that it took us 5 movies to even get that relative to his rough upbringing, because you would have thought that that would have been like an almost everyday occurrence, and it probably was in his youth, or especially teenage years, maybe even early 20s. And if they ever do make that Rocky prequel series that they're talking about for Amazon, if they do make that, that would be a good thing to dive into to kind of show. I think that that'd be pretty cool to see, but it's just funny that it took us this long, and that we don't really see it in the movies subsequently. Not even in the Creed movies does Adonis Creed really get into fights outside the ring, which is interesting. So that, again, this movie does stand out for that reason. Some parts of it stick out like a sore thumb in a bad way, but then that, as far as making a memorable climax, it does achieve that unquestionably, and a pretty darn good one, because it is rough. It is, uh, it stands out, and it is just cool to see him get enough. It's a little bit like, how like every now and again, very rarely, you'll see like Bruce Wayne fight someone and not Batman. It has a similar feel to that. It's very rare, but it's kind of cool to see whenever it happens, or like a superhero get into a fight out of costume. Kind of similar situation here. But
It's funny how Clark Kent would just get his ass kicked because that's the way he plays Clark Kent. But
well, he would feign getting his ass kicked to keep up
right,
appearances.
right.
But no, but like Peter Parker has gotten into fights with supervillains, and he hasn't had time to change into Spider-Man. But it's a similar idea. But it ends off with Rocky and Rocky Jr. climbing the steps. He sees a statue, and this part was actually kind of funny in terms of self-awareness, which was the I've been climbing up these steps for years. I didn't know there was a museum here. It's like, yeah, this is a museum here. It's the Philadelphia Museum of Art, if I recall, or modern art. But that part was kind of funny. So like, I think that you can see that they tried, and like the end credits kind of reflect the legacy of Rocky up to that point, and try the intention is to try to bring it full circle. Um, it's one of those things where I think it mostly comes down to the fact that the character feels like he's regressed so much. He's not really a better man than when he started. At least that's kind of how it feels. And so that's part of why, like, knowing that this was the last movie for 16 years, it kind of leaves a bad taste at least in my mouth, knowing that this was the last one for that time. But now knowing it's not, then it's like, well, okay, that it's not so bad anymore. But, it felt like it ended on a thud when it should have ended on a sense of triumph, at least to me. But, we will get into the agreements or disagreements with that statement when we get to the next film. But before we get off on that note, we need to talk about the music a little bit, which I mentioned has a lot of hip hop, a lot of New Jack Swing on the soundtrack, the only Rocky film that really has that outside of Mason the Line Dixon's theme that 3-6 Mafia did in Rocky Balboa. Yeah, the series didn't really have much of that, prior to this, and it hasn't really had it since. Well, actually, that's not true. It did with the Creed movies, but there it made total sense. But we had a jam-packed soundtrack, like on the version that was released in stores. Most of the songs are not heard in the movie, except for there's the one song that we hear during the big montage, and then you do not hear "Gonna Fly Now" in this one either, outside of like one moment when he's getting up triumphantly, from the
Yeah,
ground in the street fight.
you hear him for a second, but you don't hear Eye of the Tiger at all.
No, you don't. But you didn't hear "Gonna Fly Now" in the last movie at all. So here you hear it a little bit, but it's not really
Right.
in there much at all, and nor do you hear "Eye of the Tiger," which, I mean, the fact that you don't really hear "Eye of the Tiger" outside of 3 and 4, I actually kind of like, just because it makes those movies a little bit more special and a little bit more reflective of their time. Because admittedly, that's a very like 80s song, and that might have seemed
I
a
think
little
80s
weird.
should have been the music of all the movies, but well, except for the first, because it came out before the 80s. But yeah,
Well,
that's
I
just
think
me. But I love the 80s, and
I
yeah.
know, but it would have been perhaps not appropriate for trying to keep the series alive relative.
Okay, well, they still could have stayed with rock. They didn't have to go with sucking hip hop rap crap.
Oh well, I'm gonna point out some some good songs that you're neglecting, which is the song that plays during the fight is "Keep It Up" by Snap. That's an awesome song. Love it. You can actually so you can hear they sampled one of the guitar licks from "Eye of the Tiger" in there. So you kind of hear it, but not completely, obviously. Um, and then I think it's "Go For It" is the track that plays during the big montage, and that one was pretty solid too. And then they try to modernize "Take You Back," which that one was not really all that great. Um, there's a Bill Conti track called "Can't Stop the Fire," which you heard on the Rocky Balboa, the Best of Rocky compilation, which that came out to coincide with Rocky Balboa. And then, of course, the big song, "The Measure of a Man." The Elton John lends his
Right.
skills to the Rocky series, which I would not have thought Elton John when you think of Rocky, but okay.
Hey, the
Um,
song fit. The song
well,
fit.
and
Actually, yeah.
written by Alan Menken,
Yep.
Tim Rice, and Elton John, so we get a little bit of that Disney Renaissance magic in there, which I thought was kind of funny also. But I'm like, wow, people that I never would have associated with Rocky, but okay,
Well,
and it's an okay song. It's
IMDb
nothing
just
great.
credits Menken.
Which one?
I said IMDb just credits Menken for that song.
Okay, well then maybe
Yeah.
Tim Rice is not I notice the Wikipedia entry for the Rocky 5 soundtrack is noticeably wrong in terms of the track listings. Like I'm
Now, I
saying,
will admit that
it's
is a song that I was somewhat familiar with, and I could
the
not
Measure of a
tell,
Man.
but I never would have associated it with the Rocky
Oh,
series.
I love how they used it. I mean, it
Yeah.
has an end cap to the series for back in the day. I
Oh,
thought
yeah.
that the credit sequence worked well. I think the song worked well. I think it really did hit the gist of the film. Really and truly, I do think a better cut of the film would improve its standing. So I am sad that the cut's probably lost. This
Well, I
film,
don't know about Lost. That I don't know, but like
or or
I
at least
highly
not
doubt
available.
that that Stallone's enthusiasm or lack thereof would
Right.
allow it to be made or seen or whatever. I don't think people are necessarily clamoring for it in the same way that people would be clamoring for 4, because people still love 4. Rocky 5 does not have a good reputation, although I do agree another cut could probably salvage a good chunk of its reputation, and I would really, really be curious about that bootleg work print that James Rolfe mentioned. But and John G. Avildsen, like, you can definitely see why they picked him, because he is able to get some of that grit back, and get some of the lack
Yeah.
of, because Stallone, like, he had his style, and it was a good style, but it did have its little quirks, its little slow motion and the no and the montages and the slickness of it that worked for those movies, but probably wouldn't have worked for this. So,
Well,
I get why they brought him back.
I did like an interesting little bit of the trivia where they were talking about like the guy, I can't remember if there's a cinematographer or someone on his team, was apparently applying too much lighting. And
Yeah.
Avildsen was like, I want you to tone that down or whatever. I want this to look more like the first movie.
Yeah,
And he
he
said
said that it would look like a low budget documentary or
yeah,
something.
and Avildsen's like, exactly.
Yeah. Although they do light things better than they did in one, but not too much
Right.
better. So they got fairly close to the way they looked in one, and so that I give them credit for that. Again, I see much more now that they clearly did try with this one. It rings hollow for me just because of the character of Rocky. Just feels like he's a worse off person than he started off as, and it feels like his kind of sense of honor and dignity is not there anymore. Like that's really what does it for me, as well as just not so great execution on a couple other fronts. But
I think that could have been, like you said, execution, I think, is what could have fixed it. I think they could have worked a little bit more on the ending. They could have worked a little bit more on the characterization of Tommy.
Yeah.
And I think, maybe if you added about a half hour to the film and had, and I mean a real meaningful half hour onto the film, it would have come across a lot better. It's a very realistic film in how it was. I could see this as the way that the story goes. The problem being, well, it is too realistic for the Rocky series at this point.
Yeah, well, it's just sad to see him fall by the wayside in a lot of the same ways that other athletes have. Just to see him kind of fall victim to a lot of these same bad tendencies. So it's one of those things where it's like, what do you want? Do you want, kind of a harsh slice of life, even if the icon kind of goes down, or what do you want exactly? So.
And really, the next film doesn't do a lot better when it comes to harshness of reality. It just does it in a better way.
Yeah, exactly.
I do feel like, the sixth film is very similar to this film. It's just executed differently. That's the only real
Well, the
difference.
heart is back in 6, and
Yes.
we'll get there when we get there. But one thing I wanted to leave us off with, so I do think that, again, things to keep in mind for leading into the next discussion is, so the way that Rocky Jr. is treated, and what that does to him later, as well as the fact that we do get to see Rocky attempting to train someone else and not doing a good enough job of it for a certain period, and then of course it blows up in his face. But basically those things play a big role in the future films, and of course the training thing. We're not formally covering the Creed movies, but we'll mention certain things about it, and one of which is that where he failed with Tommy Gunn, he succeeds admirably with Adonis Creed. So it's nice to see that we see the failure in this one, and we get to see the triumph later on.
The way I feel about Creed is they tried to recreate Rocky and completely failed on all fronts.
We'll get there when we get
the
there.
music. Well, I just wanted to mention because I know Brandon will be leaving, so I know he had said something about Creed, and I 100% agreed. I
Yeah,
100% agreed with what you said about how the movie is just in the choreography and the fights were boring. I guess they were more realistic, which I don't like boxing, so yeah, I definitely did not like the fighting. But Creed 2 was the opposite. It succeeded everywhere the other one failed, and in every spot. I mean, it was predictable most of the movie, but it still delivered well, and I enjoyed the second one.
Yeah, and my final comments, I'll do a brief take on what my thoughts are on those because I won't be there for the next one, but I'll wait until the end.
That's just why I wanted to mention it, just because I knew you aren't going to be here, and
Okay.
I agreed with you.
Well, what did you want to say there, Brandon? Because I'm trying to wrap this one up.
Oh, well, basically that I did think that Rocky Balboa is basically what Rocky 5 wanted to be. And I think that if they had combined some aspects of the two movies, we would have gotten something along the lines of the first Rocky. Unfortunately, both movies are deeply flawed, but in different manners.
Mm-hmm.
Creed also, because I did watch that for these discussions, Creed also tried its best to be Rocky 1. I consider it pretty much the same thing as The Force Awakens in a lot of ways, because The Force Awakens wanted to be a New Hope.
No. Force Awakens was good. Let's not go there.
But Creed 2, I think, is when it started to slowly find itself. And I'm thinking Creed 3 will be its own item, and that's unless it tries to ape Rocky 3, at which point I'll go okay. But
Stallone's not going to be in Creed 3, so it's
Yes.
got its best chance of not having to rely on the Rocky character for inspiration anymore, which is probably for the best. And there's a reason why we didn't formally cover the Creed movies, because those movies are about Adonis Creed, and by the time we get to Creed 1 and 2, there's not a whole lot of development for Rocky as a character outside of maybe tying up some very teeny loose ends, but like his character has pretty much arced by the end of 6.
And it makes sense because Mickey left Rocky at 3, so it's
Yeah.
time for Rocky to leave Adonis at 3. So
Yeah. Well, but like again, I watched the Creed movies again, trying to see like, well, what about Rocky's character do we learn that's new? And nothing really. It's just seeing him try to have some meaning in these twilight years of his life. That's about it. We don't really learn.
I mean, they're
else
Creed
new.
movies. They're just he's trying to get Rocky to train him, and
Yeah.
go and so.
Well, but we'll cover that a little bit more in detail with the next movie. But yeah, unless anybody has anything additional, I think that's pretty much Rocky 5. It's not the easiest sit, but it's not as tough of a sit as I recall it being when
It's not as tough as 6.
Do we do favorite scenes for this?
Oh
one?
yeah. Well, let's go ahead and do that. Well, how about do we all kind of universally like the street fight at the end, right? So
it was pretty good.
Let's do everything but the street fight. How about that to make it interesting?
Well, that wasn't my favorite scene, so that works for me.
Well, go for it.
The punch when he punches the Ronnie King dude, not Ronnie King.
Do a different one because that's still part of that same sequence.
But that's the best part of the movie.
Well, but do something else because we've just for the sake of curiosity. Can we do it? We all kind of universally like that pretty much.
Well, I guess I like it when his son basically tells him off, and he's like you have no time for me, I don't have no time for you, he just basically tells him off and teaches them how he's been, and the son doesn't appreciate it, and it hit home, and Rocky realized, oh shit, I haven't, and instead of getting mad at his son for talking back to him, he actually did better by his son. So I like that. I like the outcome, and I liked how it played out.
Jake?
Well, like I said, I think the best line in the movie was the yeah, it's great, but I wouldn't show that to your mother. She don't know French so good. I did love that part, and there were a couple of parts, that being one of them. But there were a couple, and Kroll mentioned a couple of the interactions with his son where they're actually genuinely interacting, and were just great little moments. Especially when you compare them with all the not so great moments.
Oh, you look at the little girl I always wanted. That was pretty funny too. When he tries to put the necklace on like an earring
Oh yeah, I remember
at
that.
the end.
Oh, yeah.
Not sure if that holds up as well these days.
Nah, probably not. Tammy?
I don't really care. It was funny.
I have to say one of my favorite parts is when his son finally has enough, and he just clocks that kid.
Yeah,
You know? Yeah. Then
Yeah.
after he beats him down, the little friend he goes, "You want something?" The guy takes off, and he helps kid
I ain't
up,
like
and
him
he goes,
anyways.
Yeah, I didn't like him anyway.
and yet he becomes his friend, you know.
Yeah,
right, but he helps the
that's
kid
actually
up
true. Like,
that he
And
does
then, of
not.
course,
that's
he's
actually true.
hanging out with the kids that used to beat him up like around the holidays
Yeah,
time.
that's
I
what I'm
like
saying. He
how at
becomes
the
his
end of
friends.
him beating him up, he helps him up, and then he goes, "Are we good now?"
Yeah,
And
Well, he takes his jacket back too. He's like,
yeah.
"Look, that's mine." So,
I mean, it's an unfortunate reality that does happen a lot, where well,
Oh, yeah.
usually what happens is you stand up to the bully in whatever way, if it's physical violence or not, and usually they'll at least leave you alone, but then sometimes they actually do become
They
friends,
actually become best friends, and
which is funny, but it does happen.
oh yeah,
Not a guarantee, but it happens more often than you think.
it does.
Brandon?
I actually have two that I like. The very end, I love how they're walking up and he's talking. I was like, I've been up these stairs, but never actually realized there was a priceless works of art in this building. And
Oh,
then
I know. I love that.
and then
He
of
likes the
course
castle. I like most people.
I do like the scene at the very beginning of the movie where he's like reeling from the concussion. He's really upset because he doesn't know where he is. He's shaking. He can't stop shaking, and just the fear that
Right.
conveys that just really good. Of course, my favorite of everything though is the deleted scene where the robot is screaming, "Don't disassemble" as he's whiplashing.
That's good.
No disassemble, no.
Dave?
I'm gonna have to agree with Tammy because I love it when he clocks the kid, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Okay, we're cool, man. We're cool," you know.
Mm-hmm.
And whatnot. And I do have to admit, Jake, that French line is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty funny. I mean, and I already mentioned we all love the fight scene. I'll go something unique is that within the fight scene, something that I didn't mention was the little almost like fantasy sequence, or that almost like semi Eraserhead moment where Mickey tells him to get up and you see him bleeding, and like that was kind of surreal and freaky, and I like that. But not counting the fight scene, I really do like the actually the beginning with him, he's shaking, and you kind of know that the fight with Drago took a lot out of him, and he didn't get away with it without some
Certainly not what
lasting
we
damage.
expected to see after the big win.
Yeah, well, and actually, I did like that Creed too. Actually, he explicitly says, that guy, broke things in me that ain't never been fixed, and you see that play out here. So I'm glad that they, don't forget about that.
They definitely didn't retcon it out of existence. Which
No,
is
they
great.
did not, and I'm pleased about that. That is something I will say about this series, is that for as good as it can be and as bad as it can be, it's all taken into account. They don't conveniently forget about certain,
Right. This
installments.
isn't Friday the 13th.
No, they take it all into account, and
Oh,
they
Scream.
use it as, you know, building blocks, which I really like. But yeah, I think I like that, and I like the first flashback with Mickey. I think those are pretty effective. But that's pretty much Rocky 5. It's it is what it
Alright.
is, and take it how you will. So, but for sure, Stallone was not pleased with it. Critics were not pleased with it. It got a bunch of Razzie nominations. And that's how the series sat for 16 years until Stallone said, you know what, I can put this thing to rest better than I did before. And so that's when he made Rocky Balboa, also known as Rocky 6, in 2006, the only Rocky film that I have ever seen in the theater.
Ah.
One that we never thought we'd see, but we did, and we will
I'm
dive into
sorry.
that next.
The only one I've seen in theaters is Creed 2. But
Uh,
another weird little postscript on this one. This was, I guess we'll have to mention, this was Talia Shire's last
Oh,
run
I know.
around.
That's another thing that sort
yeah.
of sits with you wrong in the context of the
Yeah.
whole
Yep.
series. It's like
Totally and completely. I was
this
gonna
is the
say-
one that she went out on.
yeah.
Yeah,
You
the
know.
Adrian went out
Yeah.
on, and the but a weird little thing about that, this came out the same year
As the
as The
Godfather Part
Godfather
3.
Part 3.
I know.
So she was
Also a
involved
disappointing
with,
ending.
These
she
two
was involved with two disappointing
Italian
endings.
American sagas coming to an end.
Right, two Best Picture winning icons of the 70s
I know.
coming to ignominious conclusion in 1990.
I know. Well, and you know, she happened to be there for
Wow.
both of them, so it's quite
Yeah.
something. And
Alrighty.
unbelievably, Burt Young is still alive, even though Rocky 6, you know, Rocky Balboa, that was his last go around in the series, and yet Burt Young is still alive somehow.
Yeah.
And so is Shira.
Yeah, I
looked it up.
had to look
It's
up
still
to make
around.
sure Talia Shire was still alive because I'm like, why the fuck wasn't she in the movie? I'm like, she's still alive, so
We'll
Yeah.
talk about that when we get to
we
the
will
movie,
talk
I'm
about
sure.
that.
Yeah.
We would definitely
Yep.
talk about
Sounds
that.
like you got an axe to grind, so I'm curious.
Oh, I have lots of axes to grind with this
Yeah.
crappy movie.
Hopefully you enjoyed our discussion, and let us know down in the comments
Yeah.
whether you enjoyed the film or not, and join us on the Inside Movies Galore channel as we continue discussing the rest of the Rocky series.
Yeah.
Round that
Stay
bad
tuned.
boy up.
Absolutely. The last film in which Rocky Balboa is the protagonist.
All